Widow donated husband's old coat, only to learn it held clues to solve his unsolved murder years earlier. Margaret Collins stood in her bedroom closet, fingers trembling as they brushed against the worn wool fabric that still held the faintest trace of Michael's cologne. 5 years since the funeral, and she still couldn't bring herself to remove it from the hanger. Until today. The early February morning cast weak sunlight through frost-covered windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air as Margaret finally lifted the coat from its resting place. The weight of it in her hands felt impossibly heavy, as if it carried more than just memories. Her therapist had suggested this, letting go of physical reminders to make space for healing. 5 years was long enough to keep a shrine to a ghost, she'd said. Margaret pressed the coat to her face one last time, inhaling deeply, hoping to capture what little remained of him. Michael had worn it the night he died, the night he'd told her he was just stepping out for cigarettes and never returned. His body had been found 3 blocks from their apartment, a single gunshot wound to the chest, his wallet and wedding ring missing. The police had called it a robbery gone wrong. No suspects, no witnesses, no closure. The coat had been returned to her after the investigation concluded, cleaned of blood but still carrying the invisible weight of that final night. She'd hung it in the back of the closet, unable to look at it but equally unable to part with it. Now she folded it carefully into a paper grocery bag alongside other clothes she no longer needed. The community center downtown was collecting winter items for the homeless. Michael would have liked that, she thought. He'd always given his spare change to the man who slept in the doorway of their building, sometimes buying him coffee on cold mornings. Outside, the bitter wind cut through Margaret's thin jacket as she made her way down the street. At 42, she felt decades older, grief having carved lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when Michael was alive. Their 15 years together seemed like a dream now, a bright, warm interlude in what had become a colorless existence. The community center hummed with activity when she arrived. Volunteers sorted donations while recipients waited patiently in line, stamping their feet against the cold. Margaret approached a table where a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Elena greeted her with a smile. "Thank you for your donation," Elena said, reaching for the bag. "We're especially grateful for warm coats this time of year." Margaret nodded, suddenly unable to speak as Elena lifted Michael's coat from the bag. Her fingers instinctively reached out, brushing against the fabric one last time. "This is a nice one," Elena remarked. "Someone will really appreciate this." "My husband," Margaret began, then stopped. "He would be glad it's going to someone who needs it." Elena's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sure he would." As Margaret turned to leave, something inexplicable made her look back, just in time to see Elena turning out the pockets of the coat. Standard procedure, checking for forgotten items before putting donations out. But the furrow that suddenly appeared between Elena's brows made Margaret pause. "Did you find something?" she asked, stepping back to the table. Elena held up a small, folded piece of paper that had been tucked into the inside breast pocket, a pocket Margaret had never known existed. "There's a hidden pocket here," Elena explained, her fingers tracing a nearly invisible seam. "Custom tailoring? Was this what you were looking for?" Margaret shook her head, confusion flooding her as she accepted the folded paper. It was yellowed with age, the creases worn as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. With trembling fingers, she opened it, revealing a sequence of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her, written in handwriting she recognized immediately as Michael's. "No," she whispered. "I didn't know this was there." That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the paper spread before her under the harsh light of the overhead lamp. The sequence, M7R3-92BT-4DC8, stared back at her, offering no explanations. Michael had been an accountant for a small local firm. Numbers had been his language. But these seemed different somehow, purposeful, a message rather than a calculation. Sleep eluded her as possibilities raced through her mind. Had Michael been involved in something she hadn't known about? The official police theory had always felt wrong to her. Michael hadn't smoked in years, so why had he gone out for cigarettes? And why had the detective assigned to his case seemed so quick to file it away as a random act of violence? Morning found her exhausted but resolute. After 5 years of forced acceptance, a tiny flame of purpose had ignited within her. She would find out what the numbers meant, even if it led nowhere. Her first stop was Michael's former workplace, Collins and Wright Accounting. The small firm had downsized since Michael's death, moving to a more modest office in a converted Victorian house downtown. The receptionist, a young man Margaret didn't recognize, looked up as the bell above the door announced her arrival. "Is Robert in?" she asked, referring to Robert Wright, Michael's former partner and closest friend. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Mrs. Collins?" "Yes, he's in his office. I'll let him know you're here." Robert appeared moments later, his once dark hair now generously streaked with gray. His face registered surprise, then warmth as he enveloped Margaret in a quick embrace. "Maggie, what a surprise! It's been, 2 years?" "At least," she agreed, suddenly feeling awkward. After the funeral, she'd slowly withdrawn from most of their shared friends, Robert included. The pity in their eyes had been unbearable. In his office, she showed him the paper, explaining its discovery. Robert studied it, brow furrowed in concentration. "It looks like some kind of code or reference number," he said finally. "But it's not our client numbering system, and it doesn't match any accounting codes I'm familiar with." He handed it back to her. "Where did you say you found this?" "In a hidden pocket in his coat. The coat he was wearing the night he died." Robert's expression changed subtly. "And you're just finding this now?" "I finally donated the coat yesterday." "I never knew the pocket existed." Something flashed in Robert's eyes. Concern, or perhaps wariness. "Maggie, it's been 5 years. Maybe this is just some random note he made. Maybe it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." His reaction only fueled her determination. "I never believed it was a random robbery, Robert. You knew Michael. He stopped smoking 3 years before he died. Why would he go out for cigarettes?" Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The police investigated. They found nothing suspicious." Did they? Or did they just not look hard enough? The questions that had haunted her for years suddenly found voice. Michael wasn't the type to have enemies, but he was the type to notice things. What if he saw something he wasn't supposed to see? Robert's face softened. "Grief makes us look for meaning, Maggie. Sometimes there isn't any. Sometimes bad things just happen." She left the accounting firm feeling both frustrated and more determined. Robert's dismissal felt too practiced, too easy, as if he'd been expecting her questions someday. Her next stop was the library, where she spent hours researching possible meanings for the alphanumeric sequence. Nothing seemed to fit. It wasn't a bank account number, didn't match any known coding systems she could find online, wasn't a set of coordinates or a serial number for any product she could identify. As afternoon faded into evening, Margaret found herself walking the 3 blocks from their old apartment to the spot where Michael had been found. It was an unremarkable place, an alley between a convenience store and what had once been a small electronics repair shop, but was now a vape store. Yellow police tape had long since been removed, leaving nothing to mark the place where her life had shattered. The convenience store was still there, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow onto the sidewalk. On impulse, Margaret pushed open the door, setting a small bell jingling. Behind the counter, an elderly man with deep creases around his eyes looked up from a newspaper. "Can I help you find something?" he asked in accented English. Margaret approached the counter. "Actually, I'm looking for information." "Did you work here 5 years ago?" The man's bushy eyebrows rose. "I own this store 27 years now. Open every day except Christmas." "Then you were here the night a man was killed in the alley next door." His name was Michael Collins. Recognition dawned in the man's eyes, followed by wariness. "The police already ask all their questions." "Many, many questions." "I'm his wife," Margaret said softly. The wariness gave way to compassion. "I am sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Very sorry. Did you see anything that night? Anything at all that might not have seemed important then?" The store owner, Mr. Nazari, according to the name tag pinned to his vest, glanced toward the door as if checking they were alone. "I tell police everything I see." "Your husband, he come in store that night?" "Not for cigarettes." He shook his head firmly. "He buy nothing. He use phone." He pointed to a payphone mounted on the wall near the restrooms, a relic that somehow still existed in the age of cell phones. Margaret's heart began to race. He used the payphone? But he had a cell phone. Mr. Nazari nodded. He look, how you say, nervous? Looking out window many times? Then leave in hurry. 10 minutes later I hear loud noise. When I go look? He made a helpless gesture with his hands. Too late. Did you tell the police he used the phone? Yes. They check phone records. Say nothing important. Margaret thanked him and left, her mind whirling with this new information. Why would Michael use a payphone when he had a perfectly good cell phone? Who had he called? And why had the police decided it wasn't important? That night, sleep eluded her again as she spread her materials across her kitchen table, the mysterious code, notes from her conversation with Mr. Nazari, and now, photos of Michael she hadn't looked at in years. In one, taken just weeks before his death, he smiled at the camera, arms slung around Robert's shoulders at the company Christmas party. They both looked happy, relaxed. Nothing to suggest Michael had been worried about anything. But as she studied the photo more closely, she noticed something she'd overlooked before, a slight tension around Michael's eyes that didn't match his smile, and the protective way he held a manila folder against his chest with his free hand. It could be nothing, she told herself. Just her mind finding patterns where none existed. Still, she found herself wondering about that folder, about what might have been in it. Michael had always brought work home, spreadsheets and financial statements spread across their dining table as he worked late into the night. Had he discovered something in those endless columns of numbers? The next morning brought steady rain that matched her mood as she drove to the police station. The detective who had handled Michael's case had retired 2 years ago, she learned, but his files were still available. After explaining her situation to a sympathetic desk sergeant, she was introduced to Detective Alicia Ramirez, a serious-looking woman in her 30s who agreed to review the case. "We don't normally reopen cases without new evidence," Detective Ramirez explained as she led Margaret to a small interview room. "But I can at least look at what we have and hear your concerns." Margaret placed the coded paper on the table between them. "I found this hidden in my husband's coat pocket, the coat he was wearing the night he was killed." Detective Ramirez's expression remained neutral as she studied the paper. "And you believe this is connected to his death?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted. "But Michael didn't go out for cigarettes that night. He went to use a payphone in the convenience store near where he was killed." The owner confirmed it. This caught the detective's attention. "That should be in the case file." "Is it?" Detective Ramirez left to retrieve the file, returning 20 minutes later with a thin folder that seemed inadequate to contain the sum of an investigation into a man's death. Her expression had changed, showing the first signs of genuine interest as she sat down. "You're right," she said. "Mr. Nazari's statement about the payphone is here, but there's no record of any follow-up. No phone records were subpoenaed." She flipped through the sparse pages. The detective's notes indicate he considered it irrelevant since the scene presented as a straightforward robbery homicide. "But it wasn't," Margaret insisted. "Nothing was simple about that night. Michael quit smoking years before. He had no reason to go out for cigarettes. He used a payphone instead of his cell. And now this code..." Her voice broke slightly. "Something was wrong and I never saw it." Detective Ramirez studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll look into the phone records from that night. It's a long shot after 5 years, but the phone company might still have them archived. And I'll run this code through our databases, see if anything comes up." She hesitated, then added, "I should warn you, though, most cold cases stay cold. Don't get your hopes up." But hope had already taken root in Margaret's heart, fragile but persistent. For the first time in 5 years, she felt something other than hollow grief. She felt purpose. As winter deepened, Margaret's search for answers intensified. Detective Ramirez became an unexpected ally, making time for her questions despite a heavy caseload. The phone records, when they finally arrived, revealed that Michael had called a number that belonged to a burner phone, untraceable, purchased with cash, and never used again after that night. "Whoever he called knew to cover their tracks," Ramirez explained. "That suggests something more complicated than a random robbery." The code remained a mystery until Margaret remembered something, a safe deposit box. They'd rented one years ago at their local bank to store important documents, but she hadn't accessed it since shortly after Michael's death, when she'd retrieved their wills and insurance policies. The bank manager led her to the vault, checking her ID and signature before leaving her alone in a small private room with the metal box from their deposit drawer. With trembling fingers, Margaret lifted the lid, expecting to find only the remaining documents they'd stored there: birth certificates, property deeds, perhaps some old family jewelry. Instead, she found a sealed envelope with her name written on it in Michael's handwriting. Her heart pounding, she carefully opened it to find a letter and a small USB drive. "My dearest Maggie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you found the code I left. I pray that day never comes, but I've learned that hope is a poor substitute for preparation. The letter explained in Michael's clear, methodical way that he had discovered financial irregularities at the firm, evidence that large sums of money were being moved through their client accounts in a sophisticated laundering operation. The USB drive contained all his evidence, carefully documented over months of private investigation. "I don't know how deep this goes or who's involved," he'd written. "I only know it's happening under our company's name and I can't stand by and watch. I've contacted someone who can help, someone outside the firm and outside local law enforcement, which I fear may be compromised. If anything happens to me, take this to the FBI field office in the city. Ask for Agent Daniels. Show no one else." The letter ended with what brought the first tears Margaret had shed in years. "I love you more than life itself, Maggie. Whatever happens, know that every moment with you has been the greatest gift. Forgive me for keeping this from you. I only wanted to protect you. Always yours, Michael." Detective Ramirez accompanied Margaret to the FBI field office the following day. Agent Daniels was long gone, transferred to another field office years ago, but his replacement, a stern-faced woman named Agent Carter, listened to their story with intense focus before examining the contents of the USB drive. "Your husband documented an elaborate money laundering scheme," she confirmed after hours of review. "These records implicate several clients of Collins and Wright as well as—" She paused, her expression grave. "And this explains why the local investigation went nowhere. Your husband was right to be cautious." "What does that mean?" Margaret asked, though part of her already knew. "It means the detective assigned to your husband's case appears in these financial records. He received multiple payments coinciding with key points in the investigation." The revelation hit Margaret like a physical blow. "Are you saying a police officer was involved in Michael's death?" "Not directly, perhaps, but it appears he deliberately derailed the investigation." Agent Carter closed the laptop. "Mrs. Collins, with your permission, we'd like to open a federal investigation. This evidence, combined with the circumstances of your husband's death, gives us jurisdiction. Money laundering of this scale often involves RICO violations. Will you find who killed Michael?" Agent Carter's expression softened slightly. "We'll certainly try. These financial records give us a starting point, a list of people with motive." The following weeks passed in a blur of interviews and depositions as the FBI built their case. Margaret provided everything she knew, from the coded message to the letter and financial records. Each night she returned to her apartment exhausted, but driven by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. One name kept appearing in their investigations: Robert Wright, Michael's partner and supposed friend. The financial trails Michael had documented all led back to accounts Robert controlled, suggesting he was not merely complicit, but central to the entire operation. "He was the last person to see Michael alive at the office that day," Margaret told Agent Carter. "He encouraged me to let the investigation go, said I should move on with my life." When federal agents arrested Robert Wright 3 months after Margaret's discovery, the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with multiple felony charges, he agreed to a plea deal that included revealing what had happened the night Michael died. Margaret sat stone-faced in Agent Carter's office as they played the recording of Robert's confession. "Michael figured it out," Robert's voice explained, tinny through the speakers. "He confronted me that afternoon, said he had copies of everything and was going to the authorities. I tried to reason with him, offered him money, a lot of money, but he wouldn't listen. Robert had called their client, a man with connections to organized crime who had the most to lose if Michael went public. That client had sent someone to follow Michael, to retrieve whatever evidence he carried and ensure his silence. I never meant for him to be killed," Robert insisted, desperation in his voice. "I told them to scare him, to get the evidence back. I didn't know they'd shoot him. I didn't want that." Margaret closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. The hollow ache that had lived in her chest for 5 years transformed into something else, a searing pain that somehow felt cleaner, more honest than the numb grief she'd carried for so long. "Mrs. Collins?" Agent Carter's voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" Margaret opened her eyes. "No," she answered truthfully, "but I will be." Spring arrived as the case against Robert Wright and his associates moved through the justice system. Margaret testified at preliminary hearings, her voice steady as she described finding the coded message and Michael's hidden evidence. Each appearance in court was painful but cathartic, each piece of the puzzle fitting into place to form a picture of the truth she had sought for so long. The man who had actually pulled the trigger, a low-level enforcer for one of Robert's clients, was arrested trying to flee the country. Margaret attended his arraignment, needing to see the face of the person who had taken Michael from her. He was younger than she expected, barely 30, with hollow eyes that refused to meet hers across the courtroom. Seeing him, so ordinary, so human, brought an unexpected sense of deflation. There would be no satisfaction in his punishment, she realized. No closure that would magically heal the wound of Michael's absence. Justice was colder and more complicated than she had imagined. On the anniversary of Michael's death, now 6 years gone, Margaret returned to the community center where her journey had begun. Elena was still there, organizing donations just as she had been that winter day when everything changed. "Mrs. Collins!" Elena greeted her with a warm smile of recognition. "I saw you on the news. I'm so sorry about what happened to your husband, but so glad you found the truth." Margaret returned the smile, though it felt bittersweet. "I came to say thank you." "If you hadn't found that hidden pocket?" Elena shook her head. "You would have found another way. Some things are meant to be discovered when the time is right." Margaret volunteered that day, helping sort donations and speaking with people who came seeking warm clothes and simple kindness. As she worked, she felt something shift within her, the sharp edges of her grief softening into something more bearable. That evening, she stood once more in the spot where Michael had died. The alley looked different now. Cleaner, with new security lights installed by the convenience store. Mr. Nazari had hung a small plaque beside his door, in memory of those lost to violence. "May we find peace." Margaret placed a single white rose against the wall. "I found the truth, Michael," she whispered. "I followed your clues. I hope you can rest now." As she turned to leave, a young woman hurried past, huddled against the early spring chill. With a jolt, Margaret recognized Michael's coat, the same worn wool, slightly too large on the woman's slender frame. Their eyes met briefly, the stranger offering a small, grateful smile before continuing on her way. Margaret watched her go, a strange sense of completion washing over her. The coat that had carried Michael's final message had found its purpose, just as she was finding hers. The evidence had led to justice, but the coat itself had returned to its simpler purpose, providing warmth to someone who needed it. In the year that followed, Margaret became an advocate for cold case investigations, establishing a foundation in Michael's name to help fund resources for families seeking answers. She spoke at community centers and police academies about the importance of thorough investigations, especially when circumstances seemed too convenient. The pain never fully disappeared, but it transformed into something constructive, a driver for change rather than an anchor holding her in place. She made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and even eventually began to laugh again. On a warm summer evening 7 years after Michael's death, Margaret sat on her small apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beside her chair lay a worn photo album and Michael's final letter, the pages soft from countless readings. She no longer needed to read it to remember his words. They had become part of her, integrated into the person she had become, stronger, more resilient, more determined than the woman who had stood frozen in grief before a closet full of memories. The mystery had been solved, the guilty brought to justice. Michael's killers would spend decades behind bars, and Robert Wright would never practice accounting again. But the greater transformation had been within Margaret herself, from a woman defined by loss to one defined by purpose and, increasingly, by hope. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the velvet sky, Margaret closed the album and smiled. The coat that had carried Michael's final message was long gone, warming someone else through winter's chill. But the love it represented, both Michael's love for her and her enduring love for him, remained transformed but undiminished by time. Some mysteries once solved leave only emptiness in their wake. But others, like the one hidden in the pocket of a donated coat, lead not just to answers, but to new beginnings, to the resurrection of a heart long buried in grief and the discovery that love, even after death, continues to transform those who embrace it. Margaret whispered a quiet goodnight to the stars and went inside, leaving the balcony door open to welcome the warm summer breeze and whatever new chapter tomorrow might bring.